Well, now, pull up a chair for just a minute. You know, folks ask me all the time, Elias, how in the world do you always seem to bring home the sweetest watermelon? I usually laugh a little because, well, it ain't luck. Never was. My granddad would have smiled hearing somebody call it luck. He would have said, "Boy, the good Lord already marked the sweet ones." You just gotta know how to read his handwriting. That's what we're going to do today. Now, if you're standing in a grocery store during the middle of July, staring at a mountain of watermelons that all look about the same, don't feel bad. Most folks can't tell one from another anymore. Round ones, long ones, striped ones, dark green ones, they all sit there looking mighty convincing. Then you look at the price tag. $8, sometimes $10. You think to yourself, well, I sure hope this one's good. So you knock on it. Tap, tap, tap. Truth is, most people don't even know why they're tapping anymore. They just remember seeing their daddy do it when they were little. Then comes the gamble. You pick the biggest one, because bigger ought to mean better, right? You carry that heavy thing home. Saturday afternoon rolls around. Everybody's waiting. Kids already got their plates ready. You grab the knife. One clean slice, and disappointment shows up before the knife even reaches the cutting board. The flesh is pale pink. The rind's thick enough to build a birdhouse. Seeds still look white. You take a bite, nothing, just crunchy water. No sweetness. No flavor. You spent good money hauling home something your chickens might enjoy more than your family. Now here's the part that'll probably surprise you. That wasn't bad luck. That watermelon told you exactly what it was before you ever put it in your shopping cart. You just didn't know its language. That's the old part we've forgotten. See, where I grew up in these Appalachian hills, folks couldn't afford to waste money on guessing. You didn't have room in the budget for mistakes. If your family bought one watermelon for Sunday dinner, that watermelon needed to be worth carrying home. The old women around here, now they were something else. Lord have mercy. They could walk through a produce stand without touching half the fruit and somehow pick the sweetest melon sitting there. As a little boy, I thought it was magic. Turns out, it wasn't magic at all. It was observation. Years and years of paying attention to what nature was trying to say. That's something I worry we're losing these days. Modern life teaches us to trust labels. Organic, premium, farm fresh, extra sweet. But nature doesn't print stickers. She leaves clues, little signs, marks, colors, weight, texture. Every watermelon is carrying its own story right there on the outside. Once you learn to read that story, well, buying sweet watermelon gets a whole lot easier. Before we start, let me ask you something. Have you ever picked up two watermelons that looked almost identical, same size, same shape, same variety, yet one tasted like candy and the other tasted like rainwater? If that's happened to you, you're not imagining things. Scientists have spent years studying how sugars build inside watermelon fruit. They know sweetness depends on how long the fruit stays attached to the vine, how efficiently the plant moves sugars into the flesh, how healthy the leaves stayed during ripening, even how much sunlight reached the field. All those things leave little fingerprints on the outside. Farmers don't always have to cut a watermelon open to make a pretty good guess. Experienced growers start seeing those signs after handling thousands upon thousands of melons. That's exactly what these old mountain families figured out decades before anybody wrote papers about fruit quality. They didn't need laboratory equipment. They had eyes, hands, patience. Now don't misunderstand me. Nobody on this earth can promise you'll be right 100% of the time. Nature likes keeping a little mystery for herself. But these 7 signs stack the odds so heavily in your favor that you'll wonder why nobody ever taught them in school. Some of them are backed by modern horticulture. Some come from generations of growers. Most work because they all point toward the same simple thing, a watermelon that stayed on the vine long enough to finish becoming itself. That's what you're really looking for. Not the biggest, not the prettiest, not the darkest. The one that actually had enough time to ripen. And a first sign, well, in my opinion, it's worth more than all the others put together. Matter of fact, if you only remembered one thing from today's video, I'd want it to be this. But before I show you that little secret, if you're the kind of person who enjoys old Appalachian knowledge, gardening, growing your own food, preserving what the land gives us, and learning the practical skills folks depended on long before the internet told us everything, I'd sure appreciate you subscribing. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy this sort of old-fashioned wisdom. It really helps this little channel find folks who still care about learning the old ways. All right, let's turn that watermelon over. Most people never do. They keep staring at the shiny side sitting on top, the part everybody sees. The important part is underneath. There's a patch on every watermelon where it rested against the ground while it was growing. That spot never got sunshine. Around here, we simply called it the ground spot. Some folks call it the field spot. Either way, it's the first thing I look at. If that spot is almost white or just barely creamy, I usually put the watermelon right back where I found it. Why? Because white usually means the fruit left the vine too early. It didn't spend enough time resting on warm soil while sugars kept building inside. Think about an apple picked before it's ready, or a peach taken off the tree too soon. They'll soften some. They might even change color a little. But they'll never quite become what they would have been if they'd finished ripening naturally. Watermelons are much the same. Now here's what makes me smile every time I find one. A deep, buttery yellow, not bright lemon, not orange, more like old country butter sitting on the kitchen table. When I see that rich golden patch, now my attention wakes up. That tells me this melon likely stayed where it belonged. The sun did its work. The vine did its work. The earth did its work. And chances are that watermelon is about to do its work too. That's only the first clue. The second one is even more interesting because it tells you what the vine itself was trying to say. The vine is a whole lot more honest than people give it credit for. Plants don't talk with words. They talk with color, with texture, with timing. If you've ever grown tomatoes, cucumbers, pumpkins, squash, really just about any vine crop, you've probably noticed something. The plant knows when it's finished feeding a fruit. It doesn't have to be told. Nature has been doing this long before any of us showed up. Now, if you're buying watermelons straight from a roadside stand or a local farmer's market, you've got an advantage most grocery stores don't give you. Sometimes you'll still see a little piece of stem attached, maybe even a curly little tendril nearby. Don't ignore it. That tiny piece of vine can tell you a surprising amount. If that stem is bright green, still moist, still looking fresh, I usually keep walking. Not because the watermelon is guaranteed to be bad. Remember, we're stacking clues, not looking for magic. But a green stem often suggests the fruit was cut while the vine was still actively feeding it. In other words, the watermelon may have been harvested just a bit early. Now compare that to a stem that's dry, brown, almost woody. That tells a different story. It tells me the vine had already finished its work. The fruit had reached the stage where the plant itself was ready to let go. That's exactly what you want. People ask me sometimes, Elias, why don't farmers just leave every watermelon until it's perfect? Fair question. Here's the thing. Farmers have weather to worry about. Heavy rain, too much heat, disease, wildlife, shipping schedules. Labor. Sometimes fruit has to come off the field before every single melon reaches its absolute peak. That's farming. It always has been. Which is why learning these little signs helps us choose among what's already sitting in front of us. Now maybe you're shopping in a big supermarket. Most stems have already been trimmed clean. That's all right. You still have 6 more clues to work with. Never depend on only one. Old mountain folks didn't. They looked at the whole picture. And that's something I hope you remember after this video. Nature almost never whispers only once. She repeats herself. Different clues, same message. The next sign surprises people because it doesn't involve your eyes nearly as much. It involves your thumb. Now don't go squeezing every watermelon in the produce section like you're testing footballs. Nobody wants to see that. Just place your thumb gently against the rind. Press, not hard. Just enough to feel what the shell is telling you. A watermelon that's still immature often feels almost like concrete. Hard, rigid no give whatsoever. That's because the fruit is still developing. Everything inside is packed tight. The cells haven't completely matured. On the other hand, if your thumb sinks in too easily, or the rind feels unusually soft, that watermelon may already be going the other direction. Overripe, mealy, sometimes beginning to break down inside. The sweet spot, no pun intended, is right in the middle. A healthy rind should feel firm, but not lifeless. Strong, yet just a touch springy. Kind of like pressing your thumb against a ripe peach that's still holding together. You're not looking for softness, you're looking for life. There's a difference. Modern plant scientists would explain this by talking about cell walls, moisture, internal pressure, and fruit maturity. Folks around here never use those words. They'd simply hand you the watermelon and say, "Feel that?" And somehow you knew exactly what they meant. That's one thing I wish younger generations could experience more often. Learning with your hands, not just your eyes, not just your phone. Your hands notice things your brain hasn't even put into words yet. Now let's talk about the test everybody knows, and almost everybody gets wrong. The knock. Lord, I've watched people slap watermelons like they're trying to wake somebody from a nap. That's not what we're after. You don't need to beat on it. You don't need to make a scene in the grocery store. Just hold the melon steady. Give it one firm flick with your finger, or one light knock with your knuckles. Then listen, not just hear. Listen, most people expect some magical sound they've heard described 100 different ways. Truth is, it's easier than that. An underripe watermelon usually answers with a short, flat, dull sound, almost like knocking on a solid wooden post. Everything inside is still packed tightly together. The sound doesn't travel very far. Now compare that with a melon that's properly mature. The sound has depth. It rolls. There's a little echo hiding inside it, almost like knocking on a wooden barrel with water sitting halfway up. Not empty, not hollow. Just enough space inside for the vibration to carry. That's the sound old growers listened for. Here's something interesting. Researchers who've studied watermelon quality have actually measured differences in sound vibrations between immature fruit and mature fruit. Today they use electronic sensors, computers, special microphones, fancy equipment that costs more than my first pickup truck. My grandfather used one knuckle. Makes you smile, doesn't it? Sometimes old knowledge sticks around because it simply works. Not perfectly. Nothing does. But often enough that people kept passing it from one generation to the next. Now don't make the mistake of trusting only the sound. I've seen folks ignore every other sign because one watermelon sounded pretty good. That's like buying a truck because you liked the way the door closed. Use every clue together, every single one. Now we're getting to one of my personal favorites. Wait, this one's simple. So simple people overlook it. Walk over to two watermelons that look about the same size. Lift one, then lift the other. That's all. No tricks, no measuring tape, no secret formula. You're asking one question. Which one feels heavier? Not by a lot. Sometimes it's only a little. But if one surprises you, if your arms tell you it weighs more than you expected, pay attention. Watermelons are made up of roughly 90% water. That extra weight usually means more juice packed inside. A fruit that's well hydrated during development generally has better texture and a more satisfying bite. Now, weight alone doesn't guarantee sweetness. Let's be fair about that. A watermelon can have plenty of water without having the highest sugar level. But here's what I've noticed after more years than I care to count. The sweetest melons are very rarely the lightest ones. The heavier fruit almost always deserves a closer look. Again, we're stacking evidence. One clue, then another, then another. Pretty soon you're no longer guessing. You're making an informed choice. And believe me, that's exactly how old Appalachian gardeners approached almost everything. They didn't rush. They observed. They compared. They let nature answer before making a decision. The next sign may be the most overlooked one in the entire produce department. Most people don't even realize they're looking at it because they're distracted by color, or size, or price. Meanwhile, the shape is quietly telling its own story. Take a slow walk past the watermelon display next time you're shopping. You'll notice something. Some melons are nearly perfect, smooth curves, even sides, balanced from one end to the other. Then you'll see others with odd bumps, flat places, one side swollen, another side narrow, almost like somebody squeezed them while they were growing. Most folks think that's just the way they happen to grow. Sometimes that's true. But very often those uneven shapes tell us the fruit didn't develop under ideal conditions. One of the biggest reasons is pollination. Now, I don't mean you need to become a beekeeper to pick a good watermelon. Just understand one simple thing. Every watermelon starts with a flower. And that flower depends on pollinators, especially honeybees and native bees, to move pollen where it needs to go. When pollination is complete and consistent, the fruit tends to grow evenly, balanced, symmetrical. When pollination is poor or interrupted, the fruit may develop unevenly because different parts aren't growing at exactly the same pace. That's one reason experienced growers appreciate a watermelon that's nicely proportioned. Nature likes balance. So do I. Now don't misunderstand this one either. I've eaten some funny-looking watermelons that tasted wonderful. And I've seen beautiful ones that weren't worth carrying home. But if I'm choosing between two melons that check every other box, I'm taking the symmetrical one. Every time. It's another clue pointing in the same direction. Healthy growth, healthy development, healthy fruit. You know, bees don't get nearly enough credit. People notice them when they're buzzing around flowers. Some folks even shoo them away. Around here, we always welcome them. Grandma used to say if the bees were busy, we'd probably be eating well-come harvest time. Turns out, she knew exactly what she was talking about. Without pollinators, we'd lose much of the food we take for granted. Squash, cucumbers, pumpkins, apples, peaches, blueberries, and yes, watermelons. Those little workers spend all day flying from blossom to blossom, never asking for applause. So the next time you bite into a sweet watermelon, thank a bee. Now we're down to the last sign, the one that gets folks talking every single summer. If you've ever looked closely at a watermelon and noticed rough brown web-like lines running across the rind, you may have wondered what happened to it. Some people think it's damage. Some think it's disease. Some even avoid buying those melons altogether. That's a mistake. Around these hills, old-timers would grin when they saw those marks. They'd point and say, "Now there's one worth looking at." Those rough brown lines are often called sugar scars or sugar webbing. To be clear, they are not a direct measurement of sugar. You can't count the lines and calculate sweetness. Nature doesn't work that way. But here's where the old observation gets interesting. Those scars often appear where the fruit experienced tiny natural surface injuries while growing and healing. Some growers have long believed that melons with more of this webbing frequently come from flowers that received excellent pollination and developed vigorously. Modern research hasn't confirmed a simple cause and effect relationship saying more webbing always equals more sugar. But generation after generation of experienced growers kept noticing the same pattern. And when practical observations survive for decades, I pay attention. Not because they're always right, because they're often useful. That's an important difference. See, old Appalachian wisdom was never about superstition. It was about watching, trying, failing, trying again, keeping what worked, throwing away what didn't. If something helped families bring better food to the table year after year, it stayed. Everything else disappeared. That's how real tradition works, not by believing every old story, by testing it against real life. That's why I never tell folks any single trick guarantees a sweet watermelon. Anybody who promises that is selling certainty where certainty doesn't exist. What I can promise is this. When you combine the buttery yellow field spot, a mature stem if you can see one, a healthy firm rind, a deep resonant sound, good weight, balanced shape, and healthy webbing, you're no longer relying on hope. You're reading several signals that all point toward the same conclusion. A watermelon that likely finished growing the way nature intended, and that's about as close as any of us can get without cutting it open. Now imagine walking into the grocery store this weekend. Instead of grabbing the first watermelon on top, you slow down. 90 seconds, maybe less. You flip one over. Look at the field spot. Lift two of similar size. Compare the weight. Feel the rind. Tap once. Study the shape. Notice the surface. Suddenly, you're shopping differently than almost everyone around you. Not because you're smarter, because you finally know what to look for. That's the beauty of old knowledge. It doesn't usually require expensive tools or fancy gadgets. It just asks us to pay attention. Before we finish, I'd love to hear from you. Which one of these 7 signs surprised you the most? Have you been using one your parents or grandparents taught you that I didn't mention today? Leave it down in the comments. I read as many of them as I can, and I always enjoy hearing the old stories folks carry from their own families. And if you found today's video helpful, I'd surely appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and share it with somebody who's tired of bringing home disappointing watermelons. It helps this little channel keep these old Appalachian traditions alive for another generation. Until next time, may the good Lord bless your garden, keep your table full, and remind us all that nature is always speaking. We just have to slow down enough to listen. Take care, my friends. I'll see you again real soon.